There's this man in court on a trespassing charge, and it's time to post bond. He hands the court officer counterfeit $100 bills. The court officer says something not right with these. These are not legitimate currency. Hands them to the judge. The judge looks at him, sees Chinese writing on the back of the bills, has them booked into evidence, and adds a counterfeit money charge. So he's in so much more trouble than he would have been if he'd just paid with real money. I mean, the chutzpah.
The Imitation Nation Podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabir and Bersaftar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global.
This week on Imitation Nation, we'll cover the prosecution in San Diego of a man for selling fake stamps online. We'll cover the prosecution in Maryland of two men who were caught selling counterfeit HIV medicines into the supply chain, quite a lot of them. And finally, a man who tried to post bond with counterfeit currency. It did not get past the judge or the court official. We'll also talk about Europol's big Operation Shield, which is a 30-country anti-counterfeit medicine operation. It disrupted an enormous amount of criminality and patient danger, and the U.S. Trade Representative's Notorious Markets Report. All that coming up. Welcome, Sven, to Imitation Nation number 28.
Welcome, Shabir, and especially in your fancy new studio. I like it. It gives you like a Walter Cronkite feel. It's very nice.
I've called you here to interview you with some uncomfortable questions.
Look at the time. I got to go. No.
Yeah. My question number one, how are you doing on your fundraising for your Police Unity Tour bicycle ride?
Completely completed. Actually, like 130% above goal. I provided new incentives this year for folks that sponsor me, and these incentives really worked. So very excited. I have, 6 weeks to go?
And tell everybody, just remind me, is this the New York to DC ride?
So it goes from outside of New York down to DC. It is 300 miles to honor police officers that have given the ultimate sacrifice in the line of service. And I, again, ride for aid police officers during 9/11 because I lived in New York on 9/11, as well as Ken Prorock from Moody County, South Dakota, in their honor. It's a wonderful ride. We start with like 900 riders or so in New York, pick up all the chapters as we go down to DC. We roll into DC about 3,000 riders deep, go to the police memorial, not a dry eye in the house. Then we have the candlelight vigil one of the evenings there. And so it's a wonderful way to pay respect and tribute. And we raise funds for victims' families and to raise awareness and provide programming for law enforcement officers so they don't die. And the positive news this year was the lowest count of police officers dying in a really long time, which came from, one of the biggest things is not wearing a seatbelt, which cops are notorious to not do, driving too fast, and a variety of things. So all of these avoidable deaths in the line of action are being avoided. And so that's it's one of my favorite events to go to. And thank you also, Shabir, for supporting. I truly appreciate it. And everybody else who's listening, thank you for the support.
And it's 900 miles on a bicycle, right?
No, 300. 900. Just 300. 900 would be a lot for 4 days. So it's like Tour de France territory. I don't do that.
Well, I want to start first with my favorite topic of all, which is counterfeit stamps. So you've been talking about how it seems like nobody's getting in trouble for counterfeit stamps. And earlier in March, on March 5th, federal authorities actually indicted a man for allegedly buying counterfeit stamps, it appears maybe from a source in China, and then selling them online. He got 9 counts of mail fraud, 2 counts of selling counterfeit stamps, and a count of money laundering, which, it's always my favorite when you get charged and they manage to be able to get all the charges that can include money laundering. Because once you get the money laundering, it's very expensive. As a result, they're claiming that he bought his house in San Diego at the end of last year using these ill-gotten gains. And so my guess is that he's probably going to lose that house. Because once you've been charged with money laundering, everything you spent money on is grabbable and part of the illicit profit of the crime. But there we go, Sven. When I sent you those counterfeit stamps, one or both of us might have ended up in court.
Well, the good thing is we didn't look at enough counterfeit stamps to buy a house. That, by the way, stands out for me at this case. He bought a $6 million home from the proceeds of counterfeit stamps. So, as you and I talk about, like, this doesn't seem to be a onesie twosie. This is like $6 million just in counterfeit stamps. It's crazy. And I would like for the U.S. Postal Service to be more aggressive on it.
Can you do it over again? I think it was $600,000.
No, the house is $6 million.
No way. I thought I looked at it. I thought it was less than that.
No, hold on. Yeah. How is it possible to sell $6 million of counterfeit postage? Yeah.
The actual listing for it, like the Zillow listing, says it was $6 million.
Prosecutors say the scheme netted Pfister over $6 million, with a significant portion of the proceeds going towards the purchase of a San Diego home. That's what NBC reports, man. I can only go by the media. If the court case says less, that's different. I didn't read the court case, but the news reports it's $6 million. That's what I saw.
So during this whole thing, authorities made 2 controlled buys of stamps from him. And when it was all done, they released him on $50,000 bail. And part of the bail conditions that I read when I was pulling the federal court papers for this case is that he's not allowed to buy or sell stamps online while he's on bail. I love that the judge actually thought that was a risk, and he had to explicitly spell it out. It's handwritten on his bail conditions.
Quite honestly, I think it's a very fair one. Didn't we recently cover a case where somebody also was indicted for something, lost their license, and then immediately went back to it? So I don't think it's unreasonable for a judge to say, no, while we're adjudicating this, you really can't keep doing this crime. Yeah, it's
in case you think that maybe you're going to get away with it and you're going to get to continue doing it, let's make it clear you don't get to do it now anymore.
Easy. Yeah, no, a wild case. So mine is less wild, but still earth-shattering. So as you know, and we covered this one in the last parts, the USTR, the United States Trade Representatives, releases every year something that's called the Notorious Market Report, where they flag the most notorious online and real market kind of violators of intellectual property rights. And that report always kind of follows a very usual and predictable pattern. So this year, again, we saw the same categories of bad actors, right? Like large Chinese platforms, piracy sites, the typical physical overseas markets in countries where we know they have very weak IP protection. So really the usual suspect. But there was a big difference in this year's report. And the formal list stuck to the normal actors. But as you remember, right, on one of the previous parts, we discovered that during the submission process to the Notorious Market Report on the Federal Register, we saw several submissions that focused on U.S. social media companies, right? And then we saw the rebuttal from these companies saying, no, we actually didn't do this. And so it was very interesting. Well, it appears that these submissions had an impact. In the narrative section, so the intro section to USTR, what they're looking at, which is a section that USTR uses where they don't flag you as a notorious market yet, but it's kind of like a warning shot of like, hey, here's a lot of stuff we see that we're observing that is very concerning. USTR called out the growing concerns from rights holders about e-commerce, social media platforms, and specifically naming TikTok Shop, Meta and Meta's Facebook and Instagram as part of the problem when it comes to counterfeit distribution, advertising, and repeat offenders. So to be clear, right? These platforms, they were not formally designated as notorious markets.
Right.
But they were explicitly referenced. And that's really, it's a meaningful shift. It's one of those several signs, the same as like there was recently a big lawsuit that Meta lost last week on something similar. I think we're starting to see the ground shifting under the feet of social media platforms. And I hope that inclusions in reports like this will motivate these platforms to act and change their behavior and stop putting a blind eye to counterfeit and illicit trade.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like historically we've been in this debate, and you and I both started looking at this when people started dying from fake pills of fentanyl that were bought off the social media platforms or advertised on the social media platforms. And over again, parent advocates would come and say, okay, look, I've documented the harm. And the platforms would respond with, I have Section 230 immunity. So that's really sad, but that's not something you can hold me responsible for. And I think it's taken this long for various advocates to figure out, well, Section 230 immunity is not, you're not Superman. Like, the Meta lawsuit is about a product defect, basically, that a product that is addictive, that should not be. Here, USTR naming in the notorious market. There's no Section 230 defense for that, right? So the advocates are tired of listening to people say, platforms especially, you can't touch us because of Section 230, and finding things that you can touch them with.
No, that litigation, that's separate from this USTR report, but that litigation it's kind of the tobacco playbook that was used to hold tobacco companies accountable, where they went away from you should know, and they're like, no, we actually have warnings on the pack. And they went like, okay, different. You created a faulty product. You knew it was faulty. You kept doing it. Same for Facebook. You created a faulty product. You know it's faulty and you kept selling it. So it's very different, which is interesting that this is starting to happen. And again, I just hope that they look at it and say, yes, I shouldn't be doing it this way. The same on like last week's pod when we talked to the folks in the Apparel Association, and they're like, yeah, there are reports where Facebook themselves says, yeah, we know we make 16 billion of counterfeit products being advertised, but that's okay. We're just going to bookmark 2 billion in fines. That trade-off has to stop, where companies just say, no, I'm not just doing it at a profit-driven, really starting to look at what's the societal harm that you're causing by saying, oh, this is just okay. And just for the viewers, 230 was created in the nascent stage of the internet when Shabir had Shabir's blog where he wanted to write. And the big social media platform at the time was MySpace, right? So the Section 230 was written that the concern was, if I have MySpace and Shabir puts on his video of whatever he did this weekend and puts a song of Pearl Jam under it, that now the rights holders for the music don't come after MySpace and take them out for copyright infringement for using not a licensed song. That's the legislative background where we're trying to protect kind of that freedom of speech. That was the idea back then. We're way past that. So it has to be reformed. Again, USTR hopefully is a measure where everybody just keeps pushing and saying, you have to reform these business practices because you sit at the nexus of a multi-$100 billion counterfeit marketplace.
Yeah. Well, and as we learned from Jen, our good friend Jen from the Apparel Association last week, some of the platforms have been caught charging more for ads that are clearly violative for counterfeit products as somehow a method of deterrence that, oh, by the way, they just happen to make more money at while doing. It's like, it's not a deterrence if you're accepting the ad, just the cost of doing business.
Or the one Walmart, the lawsuit we had before where Walmart was helping optimize the ads for the counterfeit. Like, no, don't do that. Like, it's just do better. Everybody's going to do better.
Just want to wave my arms so everybody knows this is not a background. This is actually my office. All right. My other favorite topic, which is counterfeit money.
I never understand.
There's this man in court on a trespassing charge, and it's time to post bond, and it's a low enough charge that he's allowed to post his own bond. He hands the court officer counterfeit $100 bills. The court officer says, something not right with these. Uses a counterfeit detector pen, which says these are not legitimate currency. Hands them to the judge. The judge looks at them, sees Chinese writing on the back of the bills, has them booked into evidence, and adds a counterfeit money charge, which is ostensibly, he's in state court, but it could be a federal charge, right? So he's in so much more trouble than he would have been if he'd just paid with real money. The chutzpah.
This is one of those stories where I have a hard time to really have a comment. I know I often say, hey, keep in mind, criminals, they're not dumb.
Sometimes criminals are dumb.
Guy might have unproven my point. No, but here's the thing. This is actually a different story. It's when you already have a crime and you're doing something, don't add on. One of my favorite is I was volunteering with the Franklin County Sheriffs on a traffic stop, kind of as one of their helpers, and they pulled a man over who didn't have a driver's license on him. And officers, being nice, said, no problem. You can phone a friend. They can pick you up. Otherwise, we have to impound your car, right? So he phones a friend. The friend shows up. The friend is super nervous, like super nervous. The deputies figure out that something is wrong. They ask for his ID, run his ID. Yeah. The guy who came to pick him up had an outstanding warrant. So now he was arrested. And then it's like, do you have another friend you can call? Here's the thing. If you get called from somebody and they're like, hey, I'm getting held by Franklin County Sheriff, can you do something? And you have a warrant, the answer is, buddy, it's no me, call somebody else. The same, if you need to pay a bond and the only money you have is a counterfeit money, say, can I write you a check or call a friend that has actual money? The brazenness, it's just, and I love it because God knows how much charges that adds on, because I'm sure the state has a forgery law which can be applied. They could try to make a federal case out of it. It's just it adds months or years.
I remember in Toronto, one of the counterfeit pill makers, because there was a big oxy ring, multiple oxy rings that all were like using the same techniques, had in the trunk of their car a pill press and molds, and went joyriding, street racing around the city, and got pulled over. The police officer opens the truck. What do you want here? My traffic stop turned into a narcotics charge. You just made my afternoon.
I have a good friend, colleague, sheriff office, mine, same thing. They pulled somebody over for broken taillight and expired tags. And then when they, like, you can't drive with that, tried to impound the car. The guy got really hostile because he didn't want the car impounded. Well, net, he had like 8 kilos of meth in the trunk. Listen, if you're moving meth around, have an active registration, correct taillight. Again, we're not telling people how to do crimes here, but this goes like, not all criminals are smart. And this one is, and didn't you say he said to the judge, like, keep the change because
yes.
It was like $450. He's like $500, keep change.
Yeah. Boy. I mean, I think all criminals need a compliance department. I think that's just the.
All right. On to more serious things and actual criminals that are good at their job.
More effective.
Europol just put out the results of Operation Shield 6, and the numbers are staggering. So they do it every year. This time it was 30 countries they pulled in. They prosecuted over 3,000 individuals. They seized over 33 million euros worth of illicit medicines, doping substances, medical devices, food supplements. That included 31 million counterfeit pills. Europol, as part of that, also opened 907 investigations. They targeted 43 organized crime groups and shut down 66 websites. So I love what Europol is doing, right? We talked about it before, the fact that they can pull all of these countries in, have this large coordinated effort, and that they keep the focus on pharmaceutical crime, which is still, one of the highest seized items. And they highlight that the crime, it has real public health consequences, and that based on the scale you see, it's industrial in nature and scale, it's transnational, and it's really deeply embedded into the criminal ecosystem. So love Europol for it. Great enforcement action. We'll link to it in the show notes, but just a great action by them.
I just love it. It's almost, with the way that they schedule these enforcement actions, and it's not just pharmaceuticals, but that's the one I love the most. They are basically doing standing operations with standing relationships. And, those relationships between different law enforcement agencies, that is, from what I can tell, that is the hardest thing to build, right? Is to build that cooperation. And one of my old mentors would have said that this is now a spinning plate. It's a beautiful spinning plate. It's working perfectly. Whatever we need to do to keep it going, which in our case is highlighting its really great, good work, we should keep doing, because the benefit here is enormous, absolutely enormous.
Well, and not only the cooperation, what they do, a big piece of what Europol does is deconflicting, right? So if it's a large transnational group that operates, let's say, across 12 countries in Europe, they might have 4 open investigations and then deconflicting and say, okay, this is what everybody leads the charge on. So you don't trip over each other. You don't, contaminate any of the evidence. You don't break the chain of custody. So No, it's a great work. They also provide great coordinating efforts from Europol. No, they do a wonderful job. And like when they take out websites, one of the things I love that they figure out in Europe, they take out clusters of websites. So you have one website, but you actually have like 8 other websites that run the same. They're doing it in a way where like we're taking all 10 out. So it's less of the whack-a-mole. And yeah, Europol does a very nice, comprehensive, consistent, to your point, schedule across all their standing operations. So that's good outfit.
Yeah. One parting thought is I did an interview with Luis Diestra, who's one of the professors in Europe who is doing really, really great work on illegal online pharmacies. And that's specifically what he found. He said, these criminals operate fleets of online pharmacies, several of them dark. And if you take out an active one, they just copy the customer lists to the other ones and make them live. And if you really want to get these guys, you've got to take out all of the online pharmacies they have in the cluster, or they'll be back up in under a week, continuing their stuff. You really need to actually go after all of their online infrastructure. And it's great how, he proved it. And I think that that's probably changed brand protection work going forward for online pharmacy folks.
Yeah, love it. Very good.
So the biggest case that I've been waiting for in counterfeit drug stories has been the final trial of 2 men, brothers, Charles and Patrick Boyd. They were sentenced to 18 and 20 years respectively for their scheme to put counterfeit and diverted HIV meds back into the legitimate drug supply chain, selling them to licensed pharmacies. These were not guys who were selling them online, through TikTok. They were selling to licensed pharmacies. And that included forging the track and trace paperwork that showed the history of ownership from the factory floor to them. And we at the Safe Medicines are putting online some of the exhibits from that case because it went to trial. And they're really, really damning, right? The compliance officer spends months, if not years, trying to explain that this is not okay. You can't buy drugs from a pharmacy when their license was surrendered and the pharmacy closed months ago. You need paperwork. And then my favorite, I have many favorites from this story. One of them is that one of the people they were buying from was named King Kimchi. And in a deposition, one of the Boyds is asked directly, did you actually think his real name was King Kimchi, or were you buying HIV medicine from somebody who was using an alias? And he's like, no, I thought that was his real name. So this is one of many cases built by Gilead and its outside counsel, Patterson Belknap, which was built first from a civil suit. It's a Lanham Act suit, which you are very familiar with, where the company said, look, this is trademark infringement. They went in and executed a seizure order in the warehouse at the Boyd's business called Safe Chain, which was a licensed wholesale drug distributor, and proceeded to seize a lot of product and seize the email servers and all the documentation that was ultimately used to pull a civil judgment that, if it didn't bankrupt them, probably should have, because there was so much violative conduct there that it was very expensive. And then the Department of Justice turned around and took all the evidence created from that and built a criminal case, which just wound up. I just got the notice today that they're appealing it. But the driver of this was the wire fraud charge.
Yeah.
PSM, our managing editor, Eva, and I looked through every count, and you can look on our website at the blog post. We went through every single count. What was the recommended sentence? And then what was the sentence that they got? And counterfeiting charges, if you don't know, are like 3 to 5 year charges. I mean, it sounds crazy that if you fake an HIV medicine and sell it to pharmacies or people, that you only get 3 to 5 years when you are condemning them to death. But that's the charge. However, all that documentation, I'm guessing, resulted in the wire fraud charge. There was endless emails showing that they were very, very guilty of it. And they made a lot of money. And so the wire fraud charge, the penalty escalation for that, if you make between 65, 120 or $150 million, is 24 levels of increased penalty. Yeah, it was a lot.
That's a
And so
lot.
that wire fraud charge actually drove their long, long jail term. They'll be done serving time for the counterfeiting charges in 3 to 5 years, but they will be serving that wire fraud charge for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to see that. And just to remind folks that are not as much steeped in it as we are, how big this was, right? So what was proven, because at this point in time, you could say it's proven, they sold over 85,000 counterfeit bottles of counterfeit medicine, or bottles that might be legit but reused, and then counterfeit bottles of secondhand HIV medicine worth $250 million. Like massive. Again, this was not a small mom and pop that went across the nation. And so I love that they were being hit with this. I applaud everybody involved. I applaud Gilead for having the resiliency to build the case, right? Put the resources there, because that's always a hard thing for the brand protection departments to justify. Now, in this case, this actually most likely will be allowing them to recoup costs, which is fantastic. And then for the DOJ to take that and saying, great, let's turn that into a criminal, and then really finding every violation. And to your point, money laundering and wire fraud are great ones to add. They're also easy to prove. If you use a computer and you cross state lines and you use a computer to move money, those are the two charges that very easily get added. So, and yet 24 level escalation is a bit rough.
I mean,
So
yeah.
they will probably in their appeal go towards lowering the escalation. I don't think they can get out of the verdict, but they will probably try to lower the escalations down to something more manageable, not 20 years. That would be my guess if I'm the defendant. But no, great case. And it moved actually pretty rapidly, right? It was like less than a year between arrest and conviction, ballpark.
I mean, it helps a lot when a good actor in the world like Gilead spends millions of dollars uncovering your scheme, documenting it, and then bringing it all through civil court, civil litigation, so that there's a lot of handy facts for your criminal prosecution. I think it was a gamble. I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people went to their convictions and to their management at the pharmaceutical company and said, "Look, people are getting hurt by this. We absolutely can't allow this to continue." And as you point out, at 240 million, it's the largest counterfeiting case I've ever observed.
Yes,
in the time I've worked on this.
It's larger than the Canada medicines from like the 2000s. That was like 85 million. So yeah, 250 that's very sizable. And 250
It's a new record.
Yeah, no, it's a very sad new record, but it's a record. All right, to kind of finish this out, I'm going to add good news to the good news you just shared. And it goes back to your favorite topic, counterfeit stamps. So as you mentioned at the top of the show, counterfeit stamps are, they're not really just a US problem. They're really starting to be a global problem. When you kind of do the news search, you see that counterfeit stamps are reported across the globe, Europe, and even Australia. Well, now the Australia Post has been taking action. So the Australia Post just rolled out a new tool to detect counterfeit postage stamps. They announced that they're using a digital scanning tool that can quickly verify whether a stamp is genuine or not as it moves through the high-speed sorting machines. And while the Australia Post does not reveal the exact methodology, my assumption is that it's most likely some form of a covert tagging feature, which can quickly be read. And that's really smart because A, it's hard to fake because you don't know where the tagging is and what it is. It's also relatively cheap to do. And so I love that that's one of the first public ones I've seen postal services do. I would strongly encourage the US Postal Service to do a very similar process really soon, because as we have seen on the previous report of millions potentially being done by counterfeit stamps, seems to be something you might want to really protect. So I love that Australia is doing this. Everybody's trying to fight with smart tech, sometimes smart criminals or sometimes not so smart criminals, but way to go, Australia.
I did have a staffer once who said to me when I pointed out that someone was going to add an anti-counterfeiting feature to their packaging, she said, "You build a better mousetrap, you're going to get a smarter mouse." That's absolutely true. But the impunity with which anyone who can create an adhesive-backed stamp today is ripping off the U.S. Postal Service and the American taxpayer. is too broad. It's too easy. If we can get rid of all those lazy criminals and only get the criminals willing to overtly put in a tag into their fake stamps, I will take that. We'll just play the cat and mouse game. We're just not playing the game at all right now, and that makes me sad.
Me too. So U.S. Postal inspectors and U.S. Postal, if you're listening, please put a tag in there. We gladly talk to you of what we think should happen.
We'll cheerlead it. You do it, we'll cheerlead it, I promise.
That's right. We'll cheerlead, we help, we'll advise you gladly on what to do. So cool. All right, Shabir. With that, I thank you. Thank you. Awesome new studio once again.
Thanks.
And with that, Shabir, read us out.
The Imitation Nation Podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner of this production. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers. Podcast management by Sarah Imber Safdar. Theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.